Welcome, everyone. I'm Raj Sharma. I'm founder of Public Spend Forum. Our mission at PSF is to enable deep transparency into markets and innovation ecosystems, with a focus on the topic of the day today, building and funding regional innovation ecosystems, as well as broadly innovation across the innovation economy. What's working, what's changing, how we can all better navigate and shape really the innovation landscape and ecosystems. This is where I believe the real work happens. So we're excited about our webinar today. We've brought together an exceptional group of speakers who are driving impact on the ground, leaders who've been at the front lines of building regional capacity, engaging stakeholders, securing funding, and supporting innovators. So before we get started, I always like to make sure we get to meet everyone right away. We'll just go around and do quick intros, and then we'll jump in with the agenda. So Alejandro, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Alejandro Castillo, currently senior fellow at Purdue Northwest University. Really excited to be here, but more importantly, looking at hyper-local economic development. We'll jump into that more when you and I talk, Raj. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Mike?
Everybody, my name is Mike Freeman. I'm CEO of Innosphere. We're a 27-year-old science and technology focused nonprofit accelerator. We're in venture capital. We have some real estate. And I think as it relates to the conversation today, we're running a build to scale program over 7 states in life sciences. And on behalf of all the partners that enabled us, we're running one of the NSF engines across Colorado and Wyoming.
Great. So excited to hear about all of that. And Hannah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Scoville. I am the Senior Manager of Economic Competitiveness at the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. Essentially, I run our economic research team, so anything that can help support the work that we do at Metro Denver EDC, the work that Mike is doing, and a lot of our partners and companies across the region. We provide data and intelligence for them to make data-driven decisions.
Great. We love data-driven decisions here. So we can geek out on that a little bit during the webinar. Let me go ahead and bring up my screen again. So excited to hear. And unfortunately, Jaron Peoples. So if I just pop on my screen here. From ARI, who's also working on some really interesting capital formation projects, is not going to be able to join. He just got called into a governor's meeting. So we told him we'll excuse him today, but we'll hopefully be able to fill in some of the holes. So the agenda today is very short. We have a short 55 minutes here. We'll start with a conversation with Alejandro. Sorry, there's a typo here. I'm going to correct it on the fly. This is what we do here. We'll start with a conversation, just 10 minutes to learn about what Alejandro is up to and all the, coming out of an important position. So learning more about that. And then panel discussion here among all of us. To really learn, get deep inside of kind of what's happening, what's working. So before I do that, just a very quick overview of Public Spend Forum. PSF is a really on-demand market and supply chain intelligence firm, really working at the intersection of manufacturing and emerging tech. So we say defense, but really broadly as well. Our goal is to make markets transparent. We know that that's very difficult to do. And so that's what the role we're playing is. How do we make, information across markets easier for all stakeholders to get access so we can accelerate the pace of innovation? That's ultimately what we're trying to do. In terms of, one of the things you can access, and maybe Jack, we can put up a link for our public dashboard. This is a private version of it. We're rolling out a new one actually just today, and we'll launch the public version tomorrow. So please check it out. We'll put a link up today. This really has our rankings in terms of not just rankings, but facts around what's happening across the country, not just the obvious centers, but more importantly, the metropolitan statistical areas. We've ranked and mapped everything and mapped our empirical data.
I think we lost Raj.
I apologize. I think I might have dropped off, right? Okay. Okay. I'm back on. Okay. Just to end that part and jump into our conversation. Sorry. Here, let me just go back here. Baseline and analyze regional ecosystems. What's happening, for instance, Los Angeles. We just looked at the manufacturing ecosystem for aerospace and defense. Understand how to measure performance. How do you know things are working? Strategy around strengthening ecosystems in terms of which areas should you focus on, and then demand intelligence for regional and small businesses. So I want to go ahead and stop there and jump into our conversation then. So Alejandra, we'll start our conversation. So, first of all, I'm just interested. I know you mentioned local economic development, and you're at Purdue right now. So could you tell us about, what you're up to now?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and now that I do no longer work for government, I can speak much more freely. Uh, Being Assistant Secretary for Economic Development at Commerce during the Biden administration was really incredible. Incredible for many reasons. One, it was an unprecedented moment in terms of place-based economic development, as many of you know. And it was a very unique moment for EDA. I know that Mike is working on the bill to scale, but so many of you probably either applied or were awarded not only build to scale, but also the Build Back Better, the Recompete, the tech hubs, and so many of the programs that EDA had under its purview and still does. So it was incredible not only to manage those programs, design them, implement them, and the incredible team at EDA who really rolled up their sleeves and thought very innovatively. It gave me a fabulous national perspective. But after the election, I really felt like something's missing. We're not necessarily either getting this right or communicating. One of the many lessons learned, and I tell everybody that I speak to, is you have to start with the communication strategy because economic development is not automatic. It takes time. It's complex. It's multi-pronged. It's not linear. So I think that in large part, while I think we communicated within our own stakeholder group, you have to really do retail economic development communication. So that was one. The other thing was I really needed to understand more of the heartland. So I'm currently, I live in Chicago, but I work in Indiana, and it gives me great perspective, both of how do you weave a region that is so symbiotically related, intertwined. So I'm working along what's called the Greater South Shore Initiative, which is looking at the South Shore of Lake Michigan, all the way from Michigan City into Chicago. And as you probably know, this region was heavily steel. It is still. So you have Cleveland's Cliff, you got U.S. Steel, but at the same time, you have Chicago that's making a big bet on quantum. How do we prepare a region for this type of transition? And I know Mike and Hannah can attest to what's happening in Colorado as well with regards to workforce development, upskilling, reskilling. How do you address years of an industry like steel that in so many ways has encumbered the land and there's some challenges on the environmental side as well. How do you manage energy? How do you deploy resources? How do you unite a very disparate economic development landscape and really bring people to have like one vision and work together when you're also working along a state line, Indiana and Illinois, with very different politics, with very different vision towards the future, and yet, it's at the core of what the country needs and what we need from a national security perspective. So, I'm having a great kind of opportunity to go from the national to the local, hopefully back to the national, with some real-time understanding. And you and Hannah mentioned data-driven decisions. We also need to make it driven by the people. What's the people strategy as it relates to economic development and economic growth? I take the South Shore line every morning, and I see people coming on and off the train with a very limited infrastructure, just trying to make ends meet. So it grounds me. I believe I needed it as a leader and as a policymaker. But it also helps me push the envelope with the stakeholders on the ground. A very long-winded answer, but I hope you can ascertain my excitement of being in a region like this.
Yeah, no, there were, I mean, I have about 20 follow-ups, but we'll leave that for later. But just one other question before we jump in. So, you mentioned here you're now at the forefront or kind of really involved on the ground in Chicago, yeah, across Indiana, Chicago, that whole region. There's so many stakeholders at play. And like you already mentioned, people, workforce, politics. How do you decide, and you mentioned communication is really, really key. So how do you decide kind of where to focus and kind of what that order might look like?
That's a great question, and one that I'll pose to the panel as well. It's interesting. I really think we need to ground into the people strategy because, these are very scary times. When you talk about emerging technologies, not just AI and cyber, but now quantum as well, there's a lot of many question marks. How will this impact not only me, but my region? How will it impact what we understand as work and opportunities? How will it impact our energy consumption, our environment? For those of you who know me, I'm a big believer that it's very possible that our next big crisis will be water. Lake Michigan provides almost 86% of the nation's, water resources. And it's not something that we can, excuse me, that we can replenish. So we have to be good stewards of both the natural resources, the human resources, as we embrace these new technologies. And it's a hard exercise. But right now I'm doubling down on the workforce because I think people need to understand how are they going to fit into this, future world, in a way that spurs innovation, the next generation of businesses. So when we talk about workforce, we have to talk about entrepreneurship and that supply chain and really marry that capital, not just the federal capital, which, as we all know, is very challenged right now. But how do we incentivize the state at the state level, private sector, philanthropy? Philanthropy can no longer sit on the sidelines. It has to be part of the solution as well. So it's a hard one. I can't profess to know what the answer is. Every day there may be a recalibration of priorities. But at the same time, I think the panel will also attest that we don't have the luxury to pick and choose. We have to kind of do this in tandem. And we're going to need a lot of current stakeholders and new stakeholders to come on board.
Yeah, lots of moving parts. So with that, I just want to also, you already saw me disconnect once. There's something up with my connection here. So I will stay on as much. But Alejandro, with that, I'd love to hand it over to you to jump into the panel discussion and I think dive deeper into some of the issues you already kind of mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. Mike and Hannah, welcome. I want to make sure that, and Raj is going to stay with us. So I want to make sure we have a conversation. And if I push back, please know I'm just trying to do my job as a moderator, but also to bring out as much information as possible, because I think that, you know, as practitioners, you all see the good, the bad, and the uncertain. But I want to start with Mike. Mike, you know, you have been really at the forefront, the Build to Scale, the Engines program. Can you give us can you share some context both on what it means to wear all of these different hats for these different programs, and where is the convergence or intersection from where you sit?
Yeah, Alejandro, that's a great question, and I'll try to make this answer relatively short. I think it's important to just have a bit of context of industry history. We're 27 years in business now, supporting the science and technology community around entrepreneurship startup. That's our North Star. 2018 timeframe. You know, I think nonprofits go through kind of existential questions, you know, over their life. You know, what's our purpose? Where are we going? That was an important time frame, 2018-19 for us, when we started thinking about, we're a really good regional incubator accelerator program. What's the long-term future? And that led us to a conclusion that we should frankly provide support in and around the interior states of Colorado, kind of Mountain West, Midwest, let's call it. And two important things happened. One, COVID, and two, the Department of Energy put out some new programming that allowed us to virtually deliver clean tech, climate tech programming over multiple states. And that gave us a confidence level to first apply for a Build Back Better proposal, which we got to the finals, that really helped, I'd say, set the technology direction for the region. While not successful, we really kind of pivoted out of that into two simultaneous applications. One, Build to Scale to EDA, to run life science programming over 7 states, and then simultaneously applying to the NSF engine on behalf of both states. And so I think the point of all that is that I really think nonprofits that do economic development work have an emerging role in this kind of industrial policy shift that's not widely understood. Not criticizing universities whatsoever here, but we can do things much differently from a governance, finance, practical perspective than a university that might be trying to run a similar program. Now, there's downsides. You know, we don't have the size and the expertise necessarily, but that's what we're really drafted off of. Is we're pretty nimble and we can work quickly, and we have a really good track record of producing economic impact. So that's kind of the backstory. Now, the convergence, and I'll stop here. We're very clear that convergence is around Colorado's 4 advanced industries. Life sciences, which we're running through the EDA Build to Scale, 7 states. Climate clean tech, we're running all the programming under the engine banner. Quantum, we mentioned earlier, EDA Hub, Denver, and Boulder, excuse me. We're launching programming in the fall that's going to be quantum and photonics based. Last major industry around advanced industries, commercial space. Now, the link there is advanced sensing, compute, and decision making. And then life sciences kind of sits on its own. But you know, I think what I'm really looking at now from a sort of practical perspective is what regions of the world and the US are advancing multiple advanced industries at the same time. I think this is a question we don't really understand how to fully do that work yet. So that's kind of what's on our mind here at Innosphere, and we're, like you, are really excited about, I think, where this will carry us, and that's the direction we're heading 2026 into the future.
So before I move to Hannah, I just want to double down on a particular area. Mike, you're working across states, you know, and as you know, the paradigm has usually been like a zero-sum game. If Colorado gets something, Wyoming doesn't. But I think in the last few years, the paradigm has really shifted in terms of the multi-state collaboration. What have you seen? What was your aha moment as you tried to kind of weave this vision across multi-states?
Yeah, and you know, I guess I don't know there was an aha moment, but there was just a lot of work really grinding it out, and you know, trying to be clear in communication that, hey, Innosphere as an organization, we're not looking to step on toes or interfere with other entrepreneurial programming that's going on in Albuquerque or, you know, in Dallas or wherever. That was tricky because, you know, we're not trying to franchise our organization and, you know, sort of, you know, get in the middle of things, in other regions. So it's not been always easy, but I think we're really getting there. I think it starts with having just a clear communication plan about what are we doing and why. The science and technology entrepreneurship space in many places across the U.S. is vacant. There's not a lot of specific programming for scientists, engineers, physicians. That's the community we work with. And that, frankly, that's been the case almost for 30 years now. I mean, this isn't a new phenomenon. So I think staying true to that mission, and then being a good partner. Hey, part of being a nonprofit, you don't survive 27 years by not understanding how to partner. It's not always easy, but that is something that nonprofits, that are successful generally do pretty well. So I think we've kind of taken, the experiences we have over the years of how to do that, and kind of we're carrying it into the future.
So I'm going to come back to you, but I want to bring in Hannah. Hannah, as you think of Denver, I mean, Denver is going through such an incredible and very dynamic economic shift. What are you seeing in terms of either trends or different type of data that you're assessing as you continue to make decisions? And what's what excites you about what's happening right now?
Yeah, so that was a multi-part question. Let me kind of just start answering it. So yeah, it has been really exciting in the Metro Denver region. There's a few things that have made us, I think, a really special region. One of them is, I think, kind of what you were talking with Mike about is regionality and really the importance of not just growing Denver, not just growing Metro Denver, but really growing our whole state. And even when we're talking about what we're doing with the NSF engines is growing a multi-state region. And that's something that has been a part of Metro Denver's DNA for decades, right? And so that ability to really grow the region and understand that, we lift up the whole region, and that's going to lift up every individual community. The other thing that I have found really interesting that has been kind of changing recently is the increased pace of innovation really means that we need to pick up our pace as well, right? This means we need really great access to data, like what we have with Public Spend Forum, right? Where you can have the granularity that you need, that you can have the up-to-date real-time data to really track what's happening. I agree with you completely when you say we need to be data-driven, but we also need to be people-driven. And I think we need to remember to be really multifaceted in our strategy and really make sure that we're balancing that all in the way that we grow. The other one thing that I want to throw in, which is a topic that I think sometimes gets overlooked a little bit, but I think is really important to keep in mind, is keeping track of what's happening with demographics, with population growth, right? We're talking about goals with the Ascend engine that are on 10 years, right? We start to see shifts in our workforce when we have these demographic shifts, aging population, changing migration patterns, and that coming alongside with these very dramatic shifts in the needs of our workforce and the skill sets that we need of our workforces. So really keeping an eye on those and making sure that we're spinning all these plates at the same time, and making sure that we have the workforce that we need for the future.
And I'm glad you answered that question, drilling down on the demographics. I usually talk about geography, demography, and technology because it all comes together. And let me take that your response a step further. So as all of this is shifting, how do you either include or add either new tools or new approaches to creating healthy, innovative ecosystem?
Well, I think, continued partnerships and continued collaboration, I think is really important. I think for us as an economic development corporation, we've really had to shift our focus. We're still absolutely really focused on adding new primary jobs to our region and really focusing on that business recruitment and attraction. But we're definitely not a workforce development center, but there's absolutely this new kind of tool that we need in our toolbox, which is understanding how we're going to train up our workforce and make sure that we have the right skill sets for everybody.
Yeah. So let me bring the elephant in the room, uncertainty. As you think about the multitude of just uncertain what's happening currently, whether it's the funding, whether it's changes in the innovation ecosystem, how are you navigating that? I'd like for our audience to kind of hear what tools do you have to bring out from your toolbox that you probably didn't think you needed, but that now are becoming critically important. And how do you bring in new potential either supporters or funders of your work? Mike
me-
or Hannah, yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll just take a crack at that and let Hannah jump in. So, so let's look at the engine initiative from NSF and the EDA Build to Scale. The underlying assumption in the applications for funding is you could create some sustainability. Now, I think we all know that these are not sustainable programs from the perspective companies don't run them and make money off of them on a long-term basis. So sustainability, I think you have to be careful with that word, but we absolutely believe that philanthropy and corporations in particular, with some targeted government funding, government meaning any level, is the formula. Now, what I would say is the funding uncertainty for Innisphere overall, Innisphere meaning everything we're doing, has dramatically accelerated an area where that we have not been a strong performer is in philanthropy. And so just recently, we've really or tightened up, I should say, the value proposition and are now testing messaging with major sponsor donors. We had to do that anyway for both the engine and build to scale. It's just requiring us to move faster and do it a bit sooner in the process. I think that is the key is we need balanced funding to run the programming over a long-term basis, including the participants of programming paying for it, which we do. We don't take equity for supporting companies, they actually pay. So there's programmatic income that's very important in the sustainable model, but I'm very confident we'll figure that formula out. It's just, I'd say looking in the mirror organizationally, we've done a very poor job at engaging with philanthropy in particular, and that's going to be essential in the next 24 months.
Yeah, and just to add to that, philanthropy wants to be a partner beyond just the funding. But my question is to them as I engage them is, okay, so how do you want to join in on the thought leadership process? So how are they going to change their own investment thesis to be able to truly invest in a much more complex type of economic development? Hannah, the question goes to you as well. Like, what tools are you bringing out of your toolbox that you probably didn't think you were going to use or you had to reinvent?
Yeah, I think really, I think a big part of what it is, especially when we're talking about what we're doing with Ascend and the long-term, growth and health of our region. And we really see kind of two important sides of this. We see the importance of growing this new technology and staying on the cutting edge of new technology, and keeping this diverse economy when it comes to our different industries that we focus on, right? And so making sure that we're continuing forward with the more traditional economies that we have, and also making sure that we're still focusing on these new ones. The other side of it is just remembering that the technology that's coming out of the Ascend engine is also, really important. And I think keeping all of the companies and all the stakeholders and everybody involved remembering that this is really about the long-term health and continuing to grow our region in multiple different ways.
Yeah. Raj, as you hear the Mike and Hannah, where do you think the data could continue, or what type of data do you think we need to look at differently in order to make better decisions?
Well, I think you said the big kind of magic word uncertainty right now, right? That potentially puts a freeze on a lot of things, right? Whether it's business investment or decisions we're making across the board, right? And so in this context, in terms of regional innovation, I think where data helps and what we're kind of analyzing with with what we are kind of continually looking at, both kind of ground level data in terms of whether it's companies or research institutions or macro level data, right? Economically, from an economic standpoint, kind of what's moving. I think one is, and I think Hannah would probably agree or maybe disagree, but one is look at kind of broader trends and kind of where our investments, where is that certainty that we can say, okay, you know what, regardless of kind of administrations or kind of politics or anything, right? What are things that are consistent? So I'll give you one example, advanced manufacturing. We see across the board massive investments, and that kind of makes sense, right? If you look at, whether it's the Biden administration or the Trump administration, or even going back further, right? Just a big focus on domestic manufacturing, right? And so what are the set of technologies that go alongside that, whether it's advanced manufacturing, critical materials, et cetera. So what are areas that we see, one, the data telling us, right, where there's consistency, whether it's in terms of funding or focus, right? And even kind of innovation growth, like how are we seeing companies grow? Where are we seeing more capital, private capital, especially being attracted to, right? That's also a different indicator. So we might have a different set of prerogatives or policy objectives when we're kind of driving public or government funding, right? Very different objectives when it's private funding, right? Capital. And so Jaron's not here. So I would speak to a kind of a second trend here first, and I'll go back to kind of the capital formation in a second. Second thing that I highlight is workforce, as another example. Consistent, right? If we're going to build certain industries, and we keep talking about, we've mentioned S&T multiple times, that's a massive challenge. We don't have enough engineers right now. The other big elephant, immigration, et cetera, aside, we don't have enough engineers. We don't have enough people taking on engineering careers. So where are we going to fill that? Maybe advanced manufacturing will. What else will happen? So we just did something around LA's aerospace defense manufacturing ecosystem. Good thing is California has a massive 800 some million dollar grant around workforce, building the manufacturing workforce. So that's another example. And the last thing I'll just point out is looking at other trends that data is telling us, how's capital shifting? And, we were going to try to share today, but unfortunately, we're not through with the analysis yet. But how is the shape of capital changing from, say, whether it's federal to state and private? One example would be we're seeing more and more private capital and more interesting and kind of unique instruments being put in place, like the SBIC, which the Small Business Innovation Company, if people don't know, that's a fund and that was or a program that was set up by Small Business Administration. You're very familiar with that, of course. And alongside it now, there's a defense component called critical technology. So we're seeing PE funds step in, private equity step in, and form funds around that where there's state level funding going in, private funding going in that's being somewhat de-risked through the state funding and SBA funding. So really kind of unique instruments. So I think you'll see a lot of those trends. So, but that's where I think the data can help. Where's that certainty even in an uncertain environment?
So building on that, Mike, I want to bring you in terms of what are you seeing on the commercialization side and entrepreneurship side of the house, if you will, either because we're seeing different type of capital being deployed or programs, but what are you seeing along that line? Because again, as I mentioned on the onset, it's important to talk about workforce development without a doubt. But how are we going to build the next generation of small businesses and businesses that are going to be part of the broader supply chain for these innovation ecosystems?
Yeah, and I guess a great question. I won't pretend to have the full answer for that. I think sort of the swim lane industry has been in for many years is startups. Companies that literally just formed, 2-3 people, probably working full time in the company, raising first capital. Most of the companies that are not software based we support are heavily reliant on SBIR 1-2s, State of Colorado Advanced Industry Funding, everything known to man. So I just want to kind of paint the picture of the company that we're typically supporting. And then we'll support that business usually through a couple rounds of pre-seed, seed, small A, just meaning 3-4 million rounds versus 10-15 million rounds. So that's kind of the characteristic. So I think we have a lot of work still to do here. We're almost 30 years into this, and we're still saying there's a lot of work to do. I think regions are getting the formula for how to support their local startups down. We should at this point. We've been in this business of acceleration incubation across the country for a couple decades now. The early growth stage is still a bit of a mystery. If you look at growth stage companies and medical devices versus software versus advanced materials, they're completely different things. The capital, the talent, the team that's needed. So I think it's hard to scale that. And we've been really trying to figure that out. So I'd say we're still working, aggressively in that arena. I'd say, one thing, excuse me. I'll when I'm not talking, I'll put a link in the chat. So in this year, because we're also in venture capital, we look very, very carefully at VC trends across mainly the Midwest and mountain states. And what we know to be true is in a state like Colorado, that in 2024, companies, amassed $4.25 billion in VC. Virtually all of that was out of state capital. So we look at something called cross state. That means, hey, if a company raised a round of financing and there's an identifiable Colorado investor, they become cross state. And then we look at companies that were funded only with local capital, which you would imagine is early stage. But to put in perspective, only $60 million of 4.25 billion was local only money. Now, that's not nearly enough to support the pre-seed, seed, advanced industries of Colorado. And so that's an important message we're trying to carry from kind of the nonprofit leadership perspective is there's a lot of capital flowing in. Not a lot of these funds, although increasingly they're putting general partners in a region, originates locally. And so that means when there's VC success with a company being sold and an exit, that capital is flowing right back out to the limited partners or investors that are kind of perpetuating this challenge. We're attracting much capital, it flows back out at exit. So I think there's two things. How do you scale the post startup support, meaning early growth, and then how do you activate local capital? Certainly SBIC funds, state SSBCI funds, 100% in there. So I think this is, we have a lot to learn still, in my opinion, about how to just bring all that together in a unified whole. And that's what we're thinking about and trying to do, as we're moving forward at Innosphere.
The Governor Pritzker is also trying to work with the pension funds to address some of this issue as well, on how to invest in the state versus having some of this capital leaving the state. So there's some initiative, but just to your point, Mike, yes, no matter how long you're in this space, there's always a lot of work. I usually say economic development is not for the faint of heart because it is relentless. You have to be almost relentless just to be able to move the needle. Hannah, as you think about what's happening in Denver and that entrepreneurial ecosystem as well, which is pretty robust, what are you seeing down the road, and what interventions, if any, could be helpful to move more capital towards startups as well?
Yeah, I think, sorry, say the first part of that question again.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to assess if there are other interventions that you're aware of that can be supportive to the startup community in Denver or to just make capital more available.
Yeah, I think what we're doing at Metro Denver EDC and really being more proactive with our economic development strategy and recruiting new business and growing the entire ecosystem as a whole is a really good way that we're really focusing in on that. So we have really put a lot more focus on going to new markets and having these international and domestic recruitment trips where we're going with these targeted focuses, mostly on some of these emerging industries, right? So we have our team just went out to Boston. We have part of our team right now is in at the Paris Air Show in France, really recruiting some aerospace industries, right? And we have a few other international and domestic trips planned for the rest of the year. I think really helping to grow that entire ecosystem, being more proactive about the economic development and recruitment that we're doing is really helping to grow that.
So as we kind of round off this conversation, I want to as I usually invite folks. Oh, you wanted to jump in?
Alejandra, if I could just
Yeah.
chime in on the last question really quick, a couple of points I'd just like to raise is in terms of, I mean, there's a just, probably a separate conversation we should have next webinar, but around supporting entrepreneurs, I would say, again, among many, many issues, one that we see in kind of looking at data, especially I think Mike alluded to this in terms of, the small amount of local capital. I think especially when we go outside of the big cities where there's a lot of capital, potentially access to capital, right? When we start especially talking about smaller regions, smaller areas, we start seeing that access to capital also dry up. And that's an issue, I think, of, how do we fund entrepreneurs or give them access where, there's much less availability, whether it's angel investors and others available to, especially that startup stage, right? That's one part, and I think and so that's one piece we're looking at. And number two, the other thing I'd like to just point out. So moving along, there's a big focus on startups, but and we love startups, right? But there's also a real focus that's needed more so before the venture capital and PE firms and others step in, which provide the guidance to scale, right? But before that, there's a stage where sometimes people in federal use Valley of Death as a term, right? But how can we identify those companies that have potential, right? Maybe haven't raised capital, but they need help in kind of scaling. And we see, and we're going to be highlighting that, a number of companies like that, where we can start to provide them more of the guidance, especially through some of these programs like the government is funding, the states are funding, right? We can start to think outside of just private capital and kind of VCs and others stepping in to mentor these companies. How can we provide that? I think that those are two areas that we see a lot of opportunity and not easy answers, but an opportunity to address those. So.
Thank you for that. I wanted to just round off the conversation a bit more on what do we do collectively as practitioners of economic development, right? Where at EDA we funded several communities of practice, which was, it rendered a lot of great information and learning opportunities, but they're they're very expensive to manage, and I don't know if there is any funding left for that. But how do we build ecosystems within our own profession to learn from what Tulsa is doing, or learn from what obviously Colorado is doing, what Illinois is doing? I'm trying to hone in on what do we do on the collective side, and then a second part, because I do like multi-part questions, is how do we bridge the discussion across regions? Aerospace, you mentioned LA, but it could also be Wichita, Kansas, just like it could be, Seattle or other places where aerospace is flourishing. On the quantum side, how does Illinois and Indiana work with Colorado? What do you both see as a potential area for that broader collaboration?
Yeah, I'll jump in quick, which kind of just like my high level thought. It's the mindset thing, right? And not thinking of it as a zero-sum game, not thinking that we're going to lose a piece of the pie because it's going to another region, but really understanding that we're lifting up an entire industry. We're lifting up all of quantum, or we're lifting up all of our nation to really advance technological advancement and continue to grow our economy. So I think just really having that mindset of collaboration and of mutual growth across regions and across industries too. I mean, I think uncharted territory potentially that I think we're talking about and that Mike had brought up is that we are looking to grow multiple advanced industries in our region all at the same time. And what does that look like? Does that mean competing for talent? Because you might have some similar crossover talent in those areas. I think just continuing to be open-minded, continuing to have open conversations and be collaborative with the same goal in mind.
Yeah, Alejandro, I guess I'm not going to answer your question exactly, except to say that I completely understand the restrictions, in NSF and EDA, DARPA, whoever is providing funding to really get local impact in many, many cases. That very much becomes conflicting with what you asked, which is how the heck do we, export the knowledge we're gaining on a daily basis about ecosystem building and what might work in one location to be translated to another area. I think we're very far off from that. I mean, just an example. I mean, I think I love the MOU between EDA and NSF to have the agencies collaborate on these large scale projects. But the reality is the budgets are very firewalled, and so the practical, where does it overlap? Good overlap. I don't mean bad overlap. Where is it? And then how do we truly leverage the funding? I mean, make it more than it is not that simple, actually. And so I think, we're scratching the surface on how to collaborate more deeply. Now, I think we've got some good ideas, real world ideas about how we will do that, but it's still tricky because from our sponsor perspective, they're saying, hey, your geography is 2 states, it's around a certain set of technologies. We're making the case that aspects of quantum computing and photonics in particular cross over into the world of advanced sensing, clearly. But it's not that NSF is resistant at all here. I don't want to paint that picture, but the accountability for managing the money, it sits with me. I mean, I got to be really careful how we programmatically deploy these dollars. And so I think NSF is really coming around to the question you're asking, which is we have to export this. I mean, here's the mind-blowing piece of information that I can't get out of my head. In the Build Back Better for application process and the engine process, there were about 500 applications from the US. That's how many regions want to advance. And I mean, I cannot get that out of my head. We have to figure out how any region or community that wants to advance, we got to help every single place in the US do this. And, I mean, there's not enough hours in the day for hub leaders or engine leaders to do that per se. But if we don't get that right over time, we totally miss the mark, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad, you mentioned the EDA, NSF, MOU. I can't tell you behind the scenes how challenging it was to get that to the finish line, because you're right, there are so many parameters and restrictions and whatnot. I'm glad we got it, we got it through. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Angie Martinez, who leads the Colorado EDA regional office, because again, I want to honor our public servants who are still in this great fight. But as we ended, I just want to also maybe piggyback on one other, leave this audience with either something that you all have either experienced and kind of was that aha moment of, wow, I didn't know this. I could have, if I knew then what I know now, how would you like drive this? Or a flip on that question, looking more futuristically, what other elements do you need in this recipe to really continue to succeed as you move regional economic growth forward? And Mike, I agree with you. I just got back from a great visit to the UK, and they have adopted a lot of place-based economic development strategies as well. And the competition is not inside the US. We're now seeing true competition across the globe for talent, for technology, for resources. So you're absolutely right on that point. But I want to leave with that question of what is exciting you? What other tools are you thinking about or would you like to adopt as you move forward?
By the way, there's one more question if we get through this, just on from the audience, just FYI.
Excellent.
Alejandro, maybe I'll just jump in real quick because I think, kind of being on the point on two big applications, the thing that I look back on now that I better understand, because we've been resourced to do the work, we did an extremely detailed IP assessment globally around advanced sensing, computing, and software AI to really understand where invention and discovery is happening. And we knew that China had a substantial lead. We have hard data now that really paints a very stark picture. That's one thing that's helpful. That's not an anti-China statement, it's just they're rapidly advancing in these technology areas. In the US, the Colorado-Wyoming region is fourth in discovery around advanced sensing, computation, and AI. And so we knew we had, I'd say some scale around this, but it needed to get bigger and better. I wish we didn't have to pay a substantial amount of money to do this work. That's I've been making this point to our federal colleagues that data should sit in Washington and it should be fed to the regions, because it was incredibly time consuming to do this work, but it 100% validates the technical framework of our NSF engine going into the next cycle of funding, and puts us in a very unique position to definitively say the literal discovery that's happening and what technologies are critically important for the US to develop, not just in our region, but also where does our region have real strength relative to other metros in the US. So it's not a US compete in the US, it's compete globally. But that data is impossible to pull together. And so, I think any advice to others is, if you can get philanthropic or other funding to do that work pre-application, you'll be in a way better position, in the future. We will publicly share this. We just got this in the last couple of weeks, and we're using it to shape our NSF application for the next cycle. So I'd say probably in about 30 to 60 days, we'll release it publicly. But anyway, and you can kind of see what I'm talking
Eager
about.
to see it. Very eager to see it.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. My role here as an economist, I'm tracking the data, I'm looking at the back end of things, and I think what's really important and what we have realized in this process is always we're tracking these industries, we're seeing this technology grow. From our end, it's important to continue to use the best and the greatest technology that's available to us as well, to have the best information at our fingertips so that we're growing strategically, so that we're, tracking correctly, I would say. And so I think not just sticking to the way that we've always done tracking of industries or tracking of employment growth or our economy, but really being open-minded to some of the new technologies that are available. Again, giving our Plug for Public Spend Forum just this amazing database of information that's dynamic, that really gives us access to information, and using as many tools as possible that we have, that we can get our hands on to make the best decisions.
Thank you for that. I know, Raj, you're going to ask the two questions that are in the chat. You're on mute.
One long one here. I'll just quickly read it. About the push for manufacturing, a recent Economist article pushed back against the potential for manufacturing renaissance. What are the alternatives for companies to have long-lasting economic development and impact with similar multiples without necessarily pushing into manufacturing? So I guess, what are you seeing outside of if you're not focused on manufacturing?
So Hannah, you might speak to the data for Colorado, but advanced manufacturing, I'd say, is an area that's pretty underdeveloped in our region overall. I mean, we back in our accelerator program and then invest in med tech companies. Most of them do even low volume manufacturing offshore. This is a real problem in our state. There's not a lot of options. I mean, I just use medical just as one example. I mean, it applies to others. I think, you know, the intent to reshore certainly will give Colorado some opportunities, but I'd say we've been pretty acutely aware that that's not been, you know, real strong suit of the local economy. So I don't have a lot personally to contribute to that question, except that it's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. There's, you know, maybe other regions of our country that have a stronger manufacturing, advanced manufacturing presence. Colorado doesn't have as big of one. We're much more of a service industry. So yeah, I think kind of leaning into where our area of expertise is going to be part of that answer.
Okay. And then the second one, if we have just 1 minute here, would you speak to the opportunity for the growing commercial space industry? Mike, obviously that region is such, and there's a lot happening there.
Yeah, maybe Handy, you can, I don't know if you have the stats handy, but maybe pull them up. But I'd say, you know, getting back to what I was mentioning around the IP assessment, it starts with that, in my opinion. And I'll just, excuse me, I'm just going to cheat and rattle off a list here. But this very detailed analysis of discovery and inventions produced a report for us that said globally there's kind of 9 suites of technologies around advanced sense computing, AI, decision making, and that's computing, image recognition, image processing. Get the idea, right? And then there's families of IP that's generated below. So I won't get into all that, but that's what gave us a high confidence level that in our NSF engine, as we're pursuing advanced computation, sensing, and so on, boom, we're squarely in some aspects of photonics, some aspects of quantum, and some aspects of commercial space. And so we've had this data for a bit, which is why we're launching in the fall a collaborative acceleration program with the Colorado Space Coalition, which Hannah's organization runs, the Colorado Photonics Industry Association, and others. We're calling Earth and Space Systems. And so we're kind of getting away from, you know, some of the legacy and ionosphere terminology for exactly the reason the person posed a question. We're going to start with what is the landscape around innovation and commercial space in particular, and then some aspects of that are terrestrial based. And so we think that's a good way to wrap a suite of technologies that we know we're producing at a much higher volume in this region than other metros in the US, right? Getting back to that IP assessment. So we have a very high confidence level. We're on the right track, at least from a data perspective. And now we need to go, frankly, execute. And hey, we're decent at that. So I think that risk is not real high. So happy to chat further about that, whoever posed that question, mike@ionosphere.org, or connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to share more thoughts along those lines.
Right. Well, I know this takes us to the hour. I can't thank you enough, Hannah and Mike and Raj, obviously, for bringing us all together. Clearly, lots of different topics to further dive into. But I hope we can continue to work together and share as much information and intelligence, industry intelligence, when possible, because it is in this collective spirit of collaboration that we're going to actually move the ball forward, and as well as identify new sources of capital. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And we'll send out a follow-up from this. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for joining.
Thanks.
Thanks.